by a quick show of hands, can you just, how many of you are software engineers in the sense that who are writing code to, for whatever, web services or applications or, so since I saw a lot of conversation in the data science, I thought most of you are focused towards the
no man, this is India. We do both.
Okay. So, I mean, you're writing more than code just for machine learning, for calling learning models and all that, right? I mean, that sort of thing. Yeah. Okay, cool. So, the idea behind this talk is like what are some stuff that you should keep in mind when you talk about releasing your application or your product. What is this idea of saying that it is ready for production? And so even as the smallest startups, they release an app which is purely in debug state pretty much. It's early level stages and they call it's ready. And then there are problems that they face later on, and it's an opinionated topic. So it is based on mistakes that I've made and I've learned from other people's mistakes. So it's just some aspects that come into writing software for the cloud basically. So a couple of suggestions right at the start. So suggestions in the sense that how you should be writing your application right from the start. So in today's world, a lot of people deploy microservices. So microservices is the hot word that is used without actually knowing how it should be designed. So when you're talking about writing, so the first part of writing an application is how you organize your code. So how you organize your repository structure. So there are different schools of thought in this. So one of them is that you have one repository per microservice. So you have different repositories altogether. And while that works for some cases, but overall I found that it causes problems when your system starts scaling. So you have obviously with time you have dependencies from one service to another, and then you start importing libraries that have been created elsewhere. The moment you start importing libraries, then you start having versioning concerns when you're deploying the version that you build your application with and the version that you find later on, it's not the same. So there are random errors that are triggered from that. Besides, when an organization scales from 10 resources to over 50 to 100, you start building different teams. The moment you start building different teams, everyone starts, works independently. No matter how much you try to enforce the concept of intercommunication between teams, it happens only to a certain extent. So there's a lot of rebuilding of certain tools which are used commonly. Like there'll be a parallelization framework, for example, to make API calls. One team will build it because they needed it for whatever is their application, and another team comes up and builds the same thing, and so there is unnecessary duplication. So all these things can be avoided the moment you start following something of what I call as a monorepo. So it is a single repository. You start building you create folders in that repository for your different services, but you keep everything within the same structure itself. The other part is now Git flow. Now this is something in how you start maintaining your application. So one of the standard techniques that works is always have your master branch point to production. So whatever is there in your master at any point in time is a direct reflection of what's there in production. Then you have other branches. So you have a feature branch, whichever is there as a feature. The moment it's ready to be deployed, you merge it with master, you run through your build cycle, and it goes to production. So your master should always be a stage of stability. It should never have code which is being hacked up by a developer at that point. Then there is obviously features as one track, but there are always bugs that come in every now and then. So then another practice is to have a feature, another branch for hotfixes. So those are like half a day's job, 1 day's job, whatever it is. You branch out of master, you fix it, and you push back to master and get it deployed. So this sort of a general practice in organizing your code works very well. Another thing is code formatting and naming conventions. So you have a single repository and you have a spec defined by the organization, whatever it is, based on the trend that is used in the community for the languages that you're using. So some languages have certain guidelines in terms of this is the like the biggest debate is whether you're using tabs or you're using spaces for your indentation. Where do you place your braces? Now some languages enforce a rule, so it automatically, so there are vetting and linting tools which basically detect design or code styling errors and code compilation as in possible compilation errors. So there are tools which can be added to your pipeline, so that is a good practice. But otherwise also always have a consistency in terms of how you are structuring your code, so that any part of the code repository that you open up is readable to a guy who's not even working on that part of the system. So following those conventions is a good practice. Another thing in code styling is it's called line of sight. So whenever you have a function written in your program, the leftmost part, the leftmost indentation should be the happy flow. So you always have if and else and for loops and everything branching on various conditions. But when you read a function, so this is for quick reading. So the leftmost part, if you just follow along, you should be able to know what will the code do if everything is working the way it should. That's, if you keep that practice mentally while writing code, it greatly helps your productivity level at later stages. And this is one, the last point is a very useful advice I found is that the moment people talk about microservices, they have got services doing a whole lot of different things. You should be able to give a dry run, an overview of your system at any point within 10 to 15 minutes without looking at code. You should have, if you can paint a mental model of your system, that's a really good sign for how your system has been designed. If you can't do that, then there's something wrong. Even the most complex systems, even like I've heard a couple of like Google engineers describe how the search algorithm, the engine works, and we all know that it is a very complex system, but they are able to talk to you for 10 minutes and tell you exactly how the overall design and architecture works. So that being able to do that shows that you are able to design your system efficiently. So when you talk about services, obviously you have configurations. You have various, your database URL, your caching URL, your different AWS S3 URL, whatever it is, all these sort of things come into the picture. Use environment variables to drive configuration. First of all, definitely do not hard code it anywhere in your application. That's probably the biggest mistake you can make. The second thing is, I'm not a big fan of using a config file and adding it there, because config files tend to get checked in at some point by someone by accident. So the moment you have a config.json file in your repository, people have this habit of putting config.dev.json, config.prod. The moment they start doing this, you usually add it to your git ignore or whatever it is, but sometimes it gets added accidentally, and then there are major repercussions for something like this. So if by accident you have your AWS access key committed, so this is like the most common hack it's not even a hack, it's a script that runs on open source on these repositories, publicly accessible repositories, which keeps polling different Git repos and searches for this. And you'll find, like it has happened in our organization earlier, where some guy accidentally checked it in at night, and next morning we incurred a bill of over 7 lakhs because someone had created auto-spawned machines, because Bitcoin mining becomes a standard thing for creating instances. So these sort of errors are, like, it can happen to anyone. So a standard practice is drive your configuration through environment variables. Another common error is when you have these fancy design patterns that you're using for your application. Your application will start off, and then some singleton pattern will be there, which will be triggered on some API call, specific call. And when that call comes, that time it expects for some variable, it searches for some variable, it doesn't find it, and then the application crashes. So another good design approach would be to pick up all your configurations, whatever is required by your application, everything should be driven from the first entry point of your application. So it reads all the environment variables and it passes it below. So that if an application is missing an environment variable, your application crashes right there. Another, and flags is if you have command line executables. So if your application is like a binary, you can probably write code to override the environment variable with a command line flag or something of that nature. So that works. But the main idea is to drive it through your entry point, so your main function, to avoid errors which are unexpected at some random time. Now logging. So this is something that there's no agreement in terms of everyone. I've seen like applications where anything and everything is being logged. The moment you receive a request, a function, the input variables are logged. You process it, you log that information also. Every second or third statement is a log statement. That please don't do that. Structured logging is a good approach, but don't overdo it. So you have a log, but you have a debug type of a log. You have an info type of a log, and you have your error. Don't go overboard with warning and fatal. And if it is fatal, then the application should crash. Simple. Don't have a fatal error, and which is not. And if your application is still working, that means it isn't fatal. So don't write a log.fatal for something like that. Similarly, your info is fine. Warning. What is warning really? Is it breaking something for you? No. If it isn't, have you thought about it? Fine. Then you design the system in that manner. Don't go overboard with your logging types. Debug is something that you should be using only for your development environment. You shouldn't be activating it on production. But if there's an emergency, you can turn on that configuration for monitor your system and shut it down. So that's why debug info is something that you have. It's like if you have a travel booking system. So you have a ticketing of the last stage when you book the ticket, for example. Now you have your search criteria, the entire thing, you have a booking code. Now the entire process was a success, but it's still a good idea to log the entire itinerary that you've created for the passenger. So that sort of a log would become an info log. So error, info, and debug are pretty much the only levels of logging you should be looking at. The rest is something that you can avoid. Log only actionable info. So do log stuff that someone looks at it and he can do something about it. You'll find a lot of cluttered logs. Anything and everything will be logged, so don't do that. So that the moment someone looks at a dashboard, it should be meaningful information. It should be information that they can act upon. So log it in that manner. Another good practice is don't have your application writing logs to some custom service. So don't write an app, okay fine, you are logging it in Elasticsearch, for example. Don't write a statement in your log, in your application, which is logging it specifically to Elasticsearch, because that creates dependencies unnecessarily. Tomorrow, if you decide to move your logging system, it becomes a big change. Different microservices within the same organization will start having different approaches, and it becomes very difficult to manage. So good practice is to log to your standard output stream. You have your main function, which kicks off your application, decides where it wants to log. So there are a lot of log streaming and aggregation tools. So which will read from standard output, redirect it to a file stream, or take that standard output stream and push it onto Elasticsearch. If you want tomorrow, it will push it to S3, whatever it is. But let the main function. So it's a single line change whenever you decide to change. And other applications different services don't have any idea about where it is logging. It is just logging to standard output.
I think it also depends on what technology stack you are on. Like for example, for Python, I would not recommend logging to standard out and just using the standard logging library.
So when I say standard out, I mean the application should log to standard out. The main function can redirect it. So it is not actually going to log to standard out.
No,
your standard output can be redirected to a file stream.
But I find that, why would you do that? If there is something existing which already takes care of it,
what would be an existing?
So the Python logging library enables you can configure it accordingly.
Okay, so there are frameworks that do it, obviously, but tomorrow if I want to change the framework, doesn't that become a dependency headache for me? Like I'm saying, if in main, if your entry point, every application, every service will start with an entry point. From there itself, I can trigger my standard output to write via log4j, right? I can do that. In
But
terms
you will
of
not be able to segregate what logs go to which file. For example, there are cases where people want to log only errors. For example, they want to take concrete actions on errors, but they still want to log info and they don't want to merge the two.
you would be merging it. That is why I said indexing and aggregation. So the moment, has anyone used the ELK stack, the Elasticsearch Logstash Kibana stack?
Yeah. Experiment. Prototype.
So as in, this is how it looks. So you have Elasticsearch, which is a document store. So basically, log becomes an entry, right? It becomes a JSON object. It has primary information. It has a timestamp. It has the log type, error, info, whatever it is. It has your entire object with whatever data is to be logged, and additional information, IP of the request or whatever it is. Now, the ELK stack is basically is the most widely used open source stack for logging, and the storage for the logs becomes Elasticsearch. Logstash becomes this streaming engine, so it moves the redirects the stream from the standard output of file stream to Elasticsearch, and Kibana becomes a dashboard. So you can create this, and now, so you index these fields. Like, to answer your query, you index the log type field. So the moment you select a drop down, you select, there will be 3 fields shown to you: info, error, and
But that is on Kibana.
that is even, so the way it is stored, right? So even in Elasticsearch, you can directly make a query. So you will always have, for any sort of logging, you will always have a dashboard somewhere to access it, right? You're not going to, if you're opening a file to read the logs, that's even more dangerous. I mean, you keep scrolling.
You still want to back up those files just
Yeah,
in case.
so that will be, so you will back them up, but you are not going to search for logs in a file, right? Imagine a service which is doing 50 to 100 queries per second, and if you are logging info logs and error logs, if a system is logging info logs, it will be cluttered, it will be adding query log statements at a very high frequency.
You're not going to, so as far as info is concerned, you're not going to read them
But
unless there is some problem. That's the...
Yeah. So I'm saying that a good approach would be to add it to any sort of a store where you are able to index the type. So this makes it so you can just pick up your log type, or you can pick up within the timestamp, time range, whatever it is. You can create based on the object or error types. You can create some dashboards, whatever it is. But it helps a lot. The other aspect is instrumentation. Now, instrumentation is used to record metrics. So it's always a good idea to have this added in your entire system wherever you're writing code. Recording metrics is like recording the certain whatever are your identified parameters. You record them over a time frame. So time series, these are usually time series database backed solutions. So though something like search will work, but because it's a document based store, it's not really the prime solution for this. So something like an InfluxDB, these used to be the databases that are used for something like instrumentation monitoring. So what does instrumentation really mean? So these are 2 mnemonics which are used to describe it. So read and the use thing. So monitoring request rate, error rate, and duration of requests. Or the other one is the older version. So it was utilization, saturation, and error. So utilization is how your resources are being utilized. Saturation is how much is there in the, so something like the saturation would be like a queue depth. So how much is there to be processed, but your system cannot process at this point. So this shows at any point you look at this you look at this data, you know what is the state your system is in at a particular point. Another good practice is, so you can afford to abuse this approach in the sense that it's a metric, so it's just counters, so numerical values. So it's you can, every time you receive a request, you increment the counter by 1. Every time you handled a specific case, you increment a certain counter by 1. Or so there are 3 types of metrics primarily. So counters always go up. So request count would be an example of a counter. Gauge is something that values that go up and down in terms of measurement. So temperature value would be like a gauge, or the number of threads being processed in your thread pool. It is a counter, but it can either go in ascending or descending order. Histograms are like sampling of your scalar data. So request durations are like added to histograms. So the idea is that you have to record these metrics, you put them behind graphing, some graphing tool. So Prometheus and Grafana are like, Prometheus is used to record the metrics and Grafana is used to add a dashboard to that system. Now, and then you can create alerts. The moment you have a time series database, you can create alerts on, if the CPU utilization goes up above a certain value, fire an email, send me a pager notification, whatever it is. You can do that. And yeah. So Grafana and
by default.
Yeah. So this is like a sample Grafana dashboard. So you will find all these graphs are purely for utilization sort of metrics. And the alerts that you can create are based on if you're like even data centers, those values. If the temperature of your CPU increases beyond a certain thing, you trigger an alarm. So these sort of operations can be performed when you have something like a Prometheus and a Grafana. Yeah.
So like can we attach Nagios to like some sort of to add such a panel? Is there a plugin or something like that?
So Grafana is the tool. You can create a dashboard. You can create the type of dashboard you want. So you can have metrics, you can have graphs, you can have all this you can create there. Then you create the value. You can select the value for which you want to create a dashboard. And you can specify time duration. So at any point it will show you for the last half an hour, the last 5 hours, whatever.
Where is it like you're going to get the data? Like
data will be so like in the example I specified right now, Prometheus and Grafana. Prometheus takes care of the data. So Prometheus injects the data into a data store, and Grafana is used to view it. So like for Prometheus, I've right now I've used Prometheus a lot. The advantage for Prometheus is the way, so by default, the way instrumentation used to be done earlier, it used to be done, but the way it used to be done was that the moment you receive a request, there used to be a call made while you're processing your flow, even if it is an asynchronous call, but you make a call saying that increments XYZ counter in some NoSQL store by 1. So basically, every time a request is processed, you're creating another request. Now so this is a push mechanism. Now, the way Prometheus works is it's a pull mechanism. So what it does is, you inject a handler into your system, you increment the counter by whatever it is, and it's not going to fire a call anywhere. Prometheus, the server, wherever it is located, you can pass the IPs of your server instances. It will call your server based on whatever duration you specify. So like if you, in the config file for Prometheus, if you say, poll my server every 10 seconds it's going to pick up data for the last 10 seconds and store it in the system. So your application, it's decoupled, and it helps massively in terms of the time taken to process every HTTP request, for example. So this sort of an idea is, it kind of changed the way system monitoring was handled. And that's why I would suggest giving Prometheus a look sometime whenever you guys are trying stuff out.
Just a question. So how different it is than Nagios? Nagios also can do the same thing based on the events and polling of the data, the logs and other things also.
So polling is so the way I haven't which tool is it?
Nagios. Actually, where he's coming from, mostly the banking guys use Nagios.
Yeah.
Okay, so they are very heavily into it. So Morgan Stanley and all these they will use. There is a crucial difference. Where Prometheus comes is the real trend nowadays is containerization. If you look, Prometheus has come from that. How do I monitor containers? Not necessarily nodes of physical machines, but at the container level. See, the way we going forward is we can now build redundancies in our container. 2-3 container फट गया चलेगा. Business doesn't get down. It still continues. But I need to know soon कि गया down. So I can take some repairs. This is where Prometheus comes. This is one of the, they see advisors, from Google. So there are different aspects that are there.
But Nagios generates a lot of, when I've used it for a lot of noise on the traffic, on the network. A lot of it is the monitoring traffic, SNMP wala. Nagios used to. So I think I've not used Prometheus, but it seems like that noise will be.
Prometheus not made only for that angle. That's why I'm saying Nagios is a different.
From like a Docker and
Yeah, it's made for the container world. It's made for the container world. That is very crucial. Every aspect of his monitoring is made for a container world.
Yeah, so you will use something like Sysdig, which is designed to be container friendly with this. So like Nagios is for simple VM, right? So Sysdig is something similar, but it provides you access to containers information as well. You can use that with Prometheus.
also it is like for distributed.
So Prometheus.
Now Zabbix is used more than Nagios, even in
No,
non-container.
banking में Nagios. No, banking में Nagios is everywhere. अभी भी तो जाएगा banking में.
Like even Accenture.
So Nagios plus Munin भी use करेगा.
No, to अपना पूरा every bank has got Nagios.
An entire JSON for all the data that has been logged in the last X amount of time. So,
No.
and it adds it to a
Why
system.
the
So it's like
banks are
you
not
are
going to
doing your
container?
work, every 10 seconds I'll come and ask you what happened
Beaning
in the
was
last
there.
second.
No, it's because of this. See, they have these SOS. Oh, ये Nagios
So,
के depend.
yeah,
So let's say my application, I like you example, my application is running on distributed environments. I have 3 nodes.
Yeah.
Okay. Each running the same application, but a part of it.
Yeah.
Right? And if I want to
extra
use the
data तुमचे लोगों
whole
को
history,
हाई सुपीरियर खाते
Yeah,
so
so
way like I
might not
understand how many nodes
एक बार सेट डाउन
नाही ते दुसरं नाही काय का असं attach
you can
तो कुठे
associate tables with the client. So say you have a
So it is
service
transfer नाही होणार
dot
का?
B instance.
त्याचा सिस्टम
Alright, so it's the same service. So you
Okay,
can
as
have,
you can
you can get
type
metrics
कुठे
from
करणार?
individual instances and you can view it across the label for the combined label. So that basically means that if it is of service type it is X, you can see X.1, X.2, you can see metrics specifically by adding specific tags to it. Or you can also see just for X and it will aggregate all that information and show it to you. So it becomes a healthy monitoring tool. And this coupled with the fact that you can fire alerts, it helps a lot in terms of being able to, gauge the stability of your system. Another topic which is debated constantly is handling errors. What should your application be doing? There is never going to be a consensus on this. Everyone's going to have different opinions. But so one of the ideas that I came across is like the thought of saying that if you're logging that information, say you failed, something went wrong, whatever it is, you're logging it. Isn't that also you taking an action on the error? I mean, so you've logged it, you return something and you move on. I mean, it does your problem ends there. Then whatever it is, your application at the next level, the higher level, it moves. It shouldn't be rewriting the same, recreating the same error. So if you're logging, for example, there are cases like standard behavior in certain languages. You return two objects from a function, for example, and one is whatever is the object, the other is the error object, and that this sort of a programming practice means that if you encounter an error, you log it and then you return the error also. What is the guy above you going to do with that? So if you're logging it, so instead of returning 2 parameters, don't return an error parameter altogether. If that function is capable of taking a decision on its own, log it and return the whatever is the empty object, and let the application process continue. Another thing, this is a very powerful concept, which is error handling by behavior. Now, error handling by behavior. So when you design microservices, when you create so many packages, you start defining errors for different parts of your package. Now, the moment you are defining errors and say you are returning those errors, that means it's a service contract. I mean, you should start holding this close to heart, in the sense that if you are saying that okay, my package is going to return these 5 errors, it's like today it's returning these 5 errors. Tomorrow you can't just change those errors, because someone else who's calling a package might have written that if error returned equal to XYZ, because they are expecting a specific error from your package. If all their code breaks, if you just keep messing around with it. So this removes your flexibility to create errors, define errors at a package level. So like for those who are from who come from an object-oriented programming model, you have the concept of public variables and private variables, right? So what if you return an error object, but you don't return an error object, but you return methods that can be asked on that particular object. So for example, you say that your package is going to return something, that some standard object, and you can, on that object there is a method called, something on the behavior of the error. So for example, if it's a networking package, what is the caller really caring about? So if he's calling a package to make an API call or make a network call, and you couldn't establish a connection, instead of returning a hard-coded error, the caller is basically concerned about, does it make sense for him to try again? So if you return an object on which there is an extension method that languages provide, so dot retry allowed, which returns a bool. So when he calls that, your object will have the private instance available to it, and it can extract whatever information and then return a true or false. But the flexibility it gives you as a maintainer of that package is that you don't give a hard-coded error value as a response. So tomorrow, if you change the logic for retrying, you can always manipulate it, and it's still going to return a true false, which is what the caller is caring about. So this is a good practice if, for internal packages, not for services, it come for internal packages. Avoiding duplicates up the error stack. This is like, you create an error, you log it or whatever, and then you return the error, then the guy receives the error, again logs the same error, returns it. It's annoying. Throw, catch, try, catch, and throw is like the worst coding habit I've seen in terms of, it's a big coding spell, because whoever's writing that specific package, they feel it's right. I've handled the error and I'm going to throw an exception. Uper that guy is also going to do the same thing. Catch and throw again. That tomorrow you're going to view logs, you're going to see 5 to 6 entries for the same damn thing. It's annoying when you see a lot of entries which are actually meaningless. So if you can wrap errors if you want. So return something, the caller wraps it with its own thing, so that and define a layer which is supposed to take a decision. So let that layer log it, for example. If that layer is logging it, there will be one entry which will be wrapped. You click on that, you'll have the entire stack trace. That improves the readability, that knows your code flow, whatever it is. If you're logging individually, then definitely have something like a distributed trace ID. So the moment a request is received, you create a trace ID and you pass it across as a context parameter, so that you are able to group errors or group any sort of logs. That becomes a good practice. And you should always make sure that your API never returns internal errors. Always treat even if it's an internal service, always treat it as if it's something that is exposed to a customer. You don't want them to know that this was the exception, this is the entire stack trace. You never want that. Even if it's for an internal service. So always keep that as a programming practice, and you will find cleaner code whenever you're writing and consuming these packages. So orchestration would be the moment you have microservices, you have different movable components. So you loosely couple the system. Loosely coupling is great, but then then a concept becomes, how do you handle communication between these services? So good like message queues is something that if you want to send information like asynchronously to another service, that will have a listener which will take some action on that information. Using message queues is a great idea, but don't abuse it. That's the only thing, because I've seen a lot of code bases where, because there is message queue and it actually becomes the dream use for a distributed system, right? I do something, I just tell someone else that I've done this, and that will take an action. This programming methodology gets abused a lot, so try to avoid that. Data pipelines comes under the same aspect. So fire data into whatever is your actionable information, you put it across a pipeline, and there are services which are responding to that. Service discovery would be the entire idea of having a distributed microservice sort of a system that you have. When an instance is created, it adds it to the registry. The registry takes care of notifying other services. So like for example, in the Prometheus example, Prometheus monitors the instance. So instance ID. So if I create a new instance dynamically, that instance ID will be sent to the service registry platform, whatever it is, and that will notify Prometheus saying that this is the ID that you have to monitor. So using service discovery tools becomes mandatory pretty much when you start having a distributed environment. And when you inter-service communication is when you design two microservices and one service needs to call the other. So instead of, don't ever, because it is in the same repository, don't consume that other service through a library import or a package import, because then you are again binding yourself to that version of that service. So a good idea is to use RPC frameworks. So RPC, make an RPC call to that service so that only the endpoint and only that information is exposed to you. You're not bound to the internal details of that particular service. So designing it in that manner is a good idea.
Can you give an example of those, of using a message queue to?
Message queue would be like, alright, so we had, I was working at a travel technology startup earlier. Alright, so we used to provide bookings. It was a booking platform for flights, hotels, and all that. Now, when you have hotels, we had content. We used to pick up the hotel providers, different aggregators used to give us content. So their stream of hotels in their area. Now we had an entire process, an entire distributed data pipeline, which the content had to go through in order to so that it is standardized according to our data format. Now, when we had this sort of an approach, we had these downloaders that were written to content to download data at a regular interval. So they used to download this thing, they used to transform the data into whatever package, and they used to push it onto a message queue. Now, there are other services, say, like there will be a service which is supposed to just manipulate the, verify the address, because address is one of the most common form of errors. So there will be a service which will be listening to which will be basically subscribing. So it's a pub sub model. So the whatever is the downloader will download the data and publish the downloaded data onto the queue. There will be an address service which will be listening, which will be subscribing to that particular queue, and it will download that. Once a message item is received, it will download that hotel's entry. It will perform the address operation, or address transformation operation, and push it to another queue. There will be another service similarly listening to that. So these services there's no inter-service call over here, and because you're not binding them. And the fact that if one service goes down at any point, the entry stays in the message queue. So because of that, you are guaranteed in a way that an asynchronous approach is maintained, and later on, whenever the service is up, it will process whatever was left in the queue. So this became one of the really good use cases for us in terms of designing a distributed system and using message queuing.
This is a good part. What is the problem?
The problem
how is it being abused?
Abused is like logging. I've seen people just saying log with a message queue. I mean, you log it to a specific place. No? Why are you writing a log entry to a message queue where you have another service which you create just to poll the message queue and write it in standard output? I've seen that also happen. I mean, this would be a classic example of abusing the concept of asynchronous message queue protocol. Testing is something that it's very commonly ignored. So this is something that is very mandatory in terms of where your system goes in the future. So in small level cases, you can test it manually. After that, you don't know what you're going to break. So good approaches are when you're designing your application, when you're writing a code, create small interfaces so that you can test independent functionalities, and when you use mocks, you can plug in different aspects with mocking. So when you call an interface, and it will return a mock response instead of the actual response. So you are able to, it allows you to test at a high frequency. I'm not really I feel most languages provide good internal testing tools. I mean, there are a lot of testing libraries there for every language out there. And I'm not sure if, external packages are required. I feel the internal tools do a pretty good job, but this is, again, like I said, this is an opinionated talk. So
what's your tech stack?
Right now I'm working primarily on Go.
Okay. Go doesn't have that.
Yeah, I am also working, but we prefer not to use most libraries.
Yeah, so, yeah, that's right. Keep track of your coverage numbers and your performance benchmarking. You always do a performance benchmarking of the system. You should have numbers for how fast is your service, how load test your service. Have these numbers so that you know if at some random time some change, you never know which change slows down your application performance. So have these sort of things monitored. And main thing are tests are expensive. So there are unit tests where you test the functionality of, you just test an independent function itself. Integration tests become tests that when you are testing a package which is not in your control. So it's like a black box. So a database becomes outside your system. So integration tests come into that. Now integration tests are something that are going to slow down your eventual testing pipeline. So a good thing is that integration tests shouldn't be run regularly. So you can have, and so there is something like the acceptance tests are the ones which signify that your system overall is working as intended. So when you write acceptance tests, you start mocking the integration test layers. So that is how it works. So you are able to create a continuous integration pipeline. So that is the main idea. So you should have that sort of an approach when you're writing your application. I'm not sure TDD is a very idealistic approach, saying that you write your test cases first and then you write the code, but very rarely would someone end up doing that. So always at least ensure that all the methods exposed by any package, any service are tested. So write test cases for those.